All right. Well, thank you guys for coming out today to my talk. I'm Karthik Ramachandran. I actually graduated from KU Lawrence back in 2012, and I'll kind of go through my background. But I was talking with Jenny, who set this up, just to kind of talk about a different career path that I took, starting in human research, but really getting into the animal health industry. So I thought today what I would also be able to introduce everyone into is opportunities in animal health. So because I do work for a company, I do have to just put a disclaimer that kind of this is some of the things we'll talk about will be my views and just kind of my own experiences along the way. But I will introduce you to my company as well. So my background, I was born and raised in Colorado. Didn't really want to leave the state. I did my undergrad at the University of Colorado, so I did it in molecular, cellular, developmental biology. And I chose that because I thought, biology is the perfect pre-med route. It's it's all the prerequisites you need to get into med school. And I always thought I wanted to be a doctor. While I was at the university, I did some research in C. elegans, kind of participated in a couple different activities, realized I wasn't as interested in research per se, but so med school was still on the horizon. I actually worked as a firefighter during my undergrad for 4 years, kind of doing rescue, and I started really getting interested in trauma. So I was like, okay, well, maybe it's trauma medicine that I can go into, or something in orthopedics. So actually, when I took MCATs, I took the MCATs, didn't really do well, and kind of decided, well, let me try for grad school, and maybe I'll try the MCATs again. So that's when I actually came out to KU. KU had one of the first few bioengineering programs where you didn't have to be an undergrad in engineering. You didn't have to have all of the prerequisites. Now, there were some you did need to know some math and some basic sciences, but if you had a science background, you pretty much could qualify. So I came into KU, and one of the things I found, so I started, that was 2007. So when I came into the program, I think what was interesting is, as an engineer, one of the things we realize is, it's not just focused on math and design. When you're coming in with a variety of backgrounds, we had chemistry majors, we had biology majors, and then we had a lot of different engineering majors also, from nuclear engineering to ag tech. We brought our own perspective into bioengineering, and I think one of the cool things I personally like about KU's program, I try to recruit students here for the program, is the fact that really you can shape an engineering program based on your interests. So when I started into it, I was just master's, again, tried for med school. I got waitlisted, but I really got into my project, and I'll kind of talk on the project, but I think I decided that's when a PhD might be right for me. Engineering was much more exciting because now there's something I'm developing. I still get to do as a doctor, when we're younger, we're like, well, I want to help people on a daily basis. Well, as an engineer working in the medical field, we get to still help people. We get to design products that eventually can make it to market, to help in healthcare. And so I came out to actually KU Med, and I met Professor Lisa Stehno-Bittel. So she was in the physical therapy department working in diabetes research. And I'd always had an interest in diabetes. She had never really had an engineering student in her lab, and she took the shot on me. She was affiliated with Bioengineering, and so we had started into a project, which again I'll show it in a minute, but I got really excited about it. I had invented something new. Actually, my first year I worked in a project that I hated. I came up with an idea that I presented to her and bought products off of Amazon. I think I went to Home Depot, went to the internet, found some cheap products, came up with a new technology, which we ended up patenting at KU. And from there, I was like, this is exciting. I actually get to, get hands-on doing something fun that I gave up on the idea of med school. I thought, to try for a third time to get in med school just is not of interest. And being an engineer, I think it's fun. You get to explore down something new. I'd say I probably went the right way. So when I was in grad school, my research came into a better way to design 3D cell clusters. Really, the idea is our bodies are three-dimensional objects. Normally, when we're doing cell culture, we're growing it in a two-dimensional layer on a plate. But to get better results, 3D is really where we want to go. Cells do act differently. And I didn't get into too much science because I think it's something we can all kind of look up and learn. But really, the whole idea is 3D is better for testing drugs. And so for diabetes, islet transplants are a way to treat diabetes. You can isolate islets from the pancreas of a deceased donor. You can then infuse them into the portal vein of the liver of a diabetic patient, and you can effectively cure diabetes. Now, there were a lot of problems behind that. The clusters, normally our organs they have nice blood supply and everything. So when you're just injecting them back in, they don't build that back. Plus, they're going to get rejected. So a lot of the questions that I asked as an engineer was, could we redesign the cell cluster to resemble an islet, but look different, work on diffusion, not need blood vessels. So that's when I came up with this plate technology. You'll see at the bottom the kind of mock-up. That was kind of my first idea of, could I build a microplate? So your typical, here's a 384 well microplate you might have seen, where inside of each one of those wells are these micro divots. And you can see in the picture, it's a glass bottom plate that has these micro divots where you can seed cells, and cells like to grow in 3D. There are a few cells that don't. There's some, blood doesn't cluster, the cells won't cluster up. A lot of our suspension cell lines, so things like lymphoma won't do that. Neurons need some support to do that, but for the most part, the rest of the cells in our body, from bone to stem cells to cancer, will all cluster up. How do I? Oh, perfect. All right. So we came up with this idea, and basically here is a picture of what the 3D clusters look like. So we named this the Kanslet for the Kansas islet. It was a redesigned way to create cells that could grow in 3D. And you can see how highly uniform they are. I actually made my first version of these plates. I didn't put pictures on here, but the first version of the plates I actually made in Lawrence in their photolithography lab. So I learned a completely new technique out there, brought them here to do all the research using rat islets and human islets. And really the plate, as you see it here, didn't take shape until we actually started a company around it. But what I did do during grad school, so we took this plate technology, and I, as part of my various chapters of my dissertation, tried it in diabetes. We could transplant these and they worked better for transplants. I had worked with some researchers here who had cancer, and we actually realized we could grow cancer in 3D. We also had some stem cells in the lab we were working with for another project. So we recognized we can grow stem cells and actually do some conversion into bone and cartilage. Liver came later, but really we recognized this technology had a lot of potential use applications, not just in transplant and regenerative medicine, but also when we were building cancer, we realized, could you test drugs in 3 dimensions and get better treatments? So my last year of grad school, we actually got a grant from Eli Lilly. And this was really focused on, could the Kanslet actually be a better way to test drugs than what they use at Eli Lilly, which is native islets. And so we published a paper with them where we actually showed, in gray bars, you see these are rat islets. You can see a response from rat islets. So this drug is actually a second generation diabetes drug. You would expect, as you increase the dose, that you see insulin secretion, which is measured on the y-axis. So in rat islets, you do see this. Now, this drug, if you were to test it in human islets, which are the white bars, you'll actually see, no, it doesn't work. You would expect, human to human, there are differences that it's hard to see. So with the Canslet, or in this case, the Likarda islet, when we built it, you can actually see that with human cells, you can rescue that response and actually see that it works. As we were continuing to do this, one of the things we found is the pharma companies started to say, well, this is interesting. Maybe we could send you drugs and pay you to test it. And in the university, you can't do that. You can't make money on products. You can only do research because it's meant to be a research institution. So we decided it's probably time to spin out and start this as a new company. So my probably second or third year, so around the same time we got this grant from Eli Lilly, there was the Institute for Advancing Medical Innovation here at Cave Med. And it was focused on basically taking some of us scientists, engineers, who had product opportunities that they had also funded some of the grant funding development, but really not just funding the product, but supporting a fellowship for the student. So let's get you some exposure into what it's like to actually move a product forward, not just do the science behind it, but put a business plan behind this. Can you make money on it? So I did a year fellowship where we put a business plan behind the concept of this. I mean, it wasn't necessarily that we're going to start a company. We put in patents on it, which KU worked with us on. And I started to take a couple business classes. Luckily as an engineer, you get some electives that committee was completely okay with this idea of, well, your future job is what you want it to be. It doesn't have to be in academia. If you want to go to business, you should take some business courses. So they let me do that. And that's when I really started getting into this idea of, I like the idea of the research, but I don't like that it just goes to a publication to then have to write another grant, to just go to another publication to write another grant. I really wanted to see something go forward. So we started to, as we put this business plan together, we realized there was an opportunity to potentially start a company. And my last semester in 2012, I started working with the BTBC, the Bioscience Technology Business Center, which is in Brightonthal, to really put so to take the business plan and actually see, okay, how do the finances work behind it? How much money do we need to raise? And really decided the week after I graduated in May with the PhD, we signed papers to start a company. And there came a part when I was looking at that going, I already know how to live like a poor grad student. Now I can live like a poor entrepreneur. It's fine. But I will say one nice thing about being an entrepreneur in the sciences versus in many other areas to start is, I was at the same time applying for jobs at Eli Lilly and some of the pharma companies, because now I had this experience in drug screening, drug development, that I thought, well, I'm a PhD, maybe I can go that route. That when you draw up business plans in the science field, what's exciting, you can actually command at least a decent salary to start. You're not going to be a tech entrepreneur who might get $25,000 to start, but you're 50% owner in a potentially billion-dollar idea. We had to be more real about that when we came up with the company, because not only was I going to be into it, if I was going to hire a scientist who could also get a six-figure salary at a pharma company, I need to be able to be competitive there. So we took that risk, and Lisa also took the risk. So she's my business partner on this. And we started a company in 2012. So Lisa and I licensed, I think we at that point had 2 or 3 patents at KU focused around the plate technology, focused around the 3D cell clusters themselves. So we exclusively licensed those out, so that way we could be the commercialization group that'll take this to make money on it. We started in the BTBC in a small, I think we started with 1 lab, 700 square feet. And over 5 years, we ended up growing to cover the ground floor of that building. We had all the labs on the ground floor, and it would just start to become inefficient. I think we came to a point where in 2017, we graduated and moved into our own headquarters in South Kansas City. So we're actually located in the Grandview Triangle. I'll get into why we are an animal health company. So I'll show some of that, but really the diabetes product, animals get the same disease as we do. And we recognize that there was an opportunity for us to go into that field. But our first 5 years, we worked making money working for big pharma companies. So that's really what funded it. We had our families actually put in some money to risk some money up front so we can start our labs. We became profitable after our first year of being a company. And right before we moved, actually, we had a major investor come in and put in some money to say, you know what, being a service-based organization is all right. I mean, you have to grow a sales force, you have to grow a lot more marketing, but being able to bring our cell therapy forward, which is really what the underlying principle of all this was, it needed funding. And so we brought in an investor, and really over the years, between investor funding and revenue, we've generated over $10 million in funding for the company to really grow it. So this is a question that we actually asked when we were also starting the company. So we knew we'd have a way to make money doing some contract research, but really it was, there's an opportunity for us to treat pets. We recognized when we were reading publications that there were over 650, and actually now I think it's over 700 research publications where dogs are used as a preclinical models to get to human. And we saw this in diabetes, and we asked the question, okay, you test a product in dogs. In many of those papers, I mean, thousands of dogs had been cured of diabetes, all trying to get a product to human. Now, some of those products won't translate to human because dogs are different. But it made us ask the question, well, if some of those products are translating, why hasn't anyone brought it to pets? As you can see in the green box, it really comes down to the price point. You know, in humans, we have insurance companies that'll cover some of this cost, and really, what's a human life worth? Where there's money that can go into that. An animal, on the other hand, our pets, our number one competitor is euthanasia. And I mean, it's just the reality of things. People don't necessarily want to spend that much on pets. You'll see some who will spend the $10,000, $20,000 it costs to treat their pet of cancer, but that's few and far between. Most owners, I think the average price that they're willing to spend is about $2,500. So we also asked all the other questions, you know, as an engineer, as a business, how do we actually do this? You know, could it actually be done in the clinic? We have huge surgical centers in humans that, you know, again, there's a cost factor there. What about immunosuppression? In humans, when this is done, they take an immunosuppressant. Do we really want to give an animal an immunosuppressor where they're going to go out, eat whatever bacteria, and now get sick of something else? And you can see kind of the list of questions we went through, but really it all came down to, can all this be done at the right price? But when we actually looked at, you know, what is our opportunity here? So this is kind of the business nerd side of it is, you know, it's not billions of dollars like it is in humans. But it is a pretty good size investable market. I mean, the current products out there make about $700 million a year. And the potential for our product is somewhere around $100 million a year, which in animals is a blockbuster drug. In humans, $1 billion is a blockbuster drug. In animals, the other thing is insulin is the only way to treat diabetes. None of the type 2 drugs work, especially when you look at cats. They are trying some in cats, but the type 2 drugs just don't work. Usually it's all caught way too late that insulin supplements exogenous insulin is the only way to be able to treat a pet. The other thing you can only imagine, you know, it's hard enough to convince a pet that you need to inject it. You have to do this twice a day, every 12 hours at a set dose. And it's hard to match it to blood glucose levels like we would do. We'd actually, you know, stick our finger, monitor how much insulin we would need, and then inject ourselves. So it's inconvenient. And in the animal side, it is human insulin that's mostly used. And as you can see, again, the price that people do spend on these pets is, you know, $1,500 to $4,500, depending on the pet. But the real question here is the options that do come up, which is I either don't treat my pet and they potentially suffer, or do I decide to euthanize them? And we kind of tackled this question with that in mind. It needed to be cost effective. Obviously in humans, islet transplants are done in humans. They can be $100,000 to $150,000. So super expensive, partly because there's just so much that goes into it. Regulations is another thing that plays into that. So at Likarda, one of the things we recognized is we had to get away from immunosuppressors. So this is a technology we invented at Likarda within probably our first 2 years. It's microencapsulation, but instead of using alginate, which is a popular microencapsulant, alginate, you can drop it in calcium. It immediately forms a sphere, and you can control the size and everything. But alginate is foreign. I mean, it's made from seaweed. It just doesn't, it's not accepted by the body. And it's been used for 40 years and no treatments have come using alginate. But one of the nice things out there there's a variety of other hydrogels out there. Things like collagen, hyaluronic acid, polyethylene glycol. These are all used in wound healing. They're used in cosmetics. They're also used in, joint treatments like hyaluronic acid. And so we asked the question, could these are much better. They're already being used. They don't seem to be failing. Could we make beads with them? So you still have an injectable transplant. So we invented a way that we could do that using this technology we call core shell spherification. Again, this is more of a businessy slide, but the idea here is we had to rethink how we think about bringing a product to market to be able to, that a vet will be able to afford it, that they can, we didn't want to make it complicated to where you'd need 3 vets to be able to do a transplant. Our product is injectable. It can be used with any kind of cell. So not just in diabetes, but we can use it in arthritis as well. We are looking at some other diseases also, like hypothyroidism, hypoadrenocortisol. And does it work? So this is where we actually did an islet transplant into dogs. And we found that initially it's, you see on the far left, where the animal, the dots you're seeing are basically their daily insulin injections. The line is their blood glucose, and it's all over the place. It's pretty hard to control. We gave them, we did as a multiple dose just because we were kind of learning how do you dose islets. You also needed a donor. So you needed enough donors to be able to get this. But you find that after 2 doses, we could bring their blood glucose levels down to normal. So effectively treating them of their diabetes. Surprisingly, in animals, it's actually, there's an easier checkpoint than this, which is, they say clinical signs. So if the animal's not urinating, they're happy, they're not drinking tons of water, or they're being lethargic. As long as you get past and the owner's happy, that tends to be the current criteria that most people look at. We said, well, that still doesn't mean that they're being treated of the underlying blood glucose levels. They can still be all over the place, as you can see in the previous, in the first section there. So as we move that forward, we're actually moving to stem cells now because we realize having a donor still makes it difficult to bring a product forward. And so we actually have multiple products that we're developing, looking at products for cats and for dogs, looking at osteoarthritis. And one of the things that still excites us, as a business, we're focused on animals, but as scientists, we know all of this is approved to also be able to bring this to humans. I see people shaking their heads being like, yeah, that makes sense. Investors don't get it. A part of that is you realize as a business, to be successful, we have to keep focused. We have to get a product into pets that can make money and be profitable, and that's the checkpoint really for an investor. Treating a disease successfully is a checkpoint that we as scientists look at, whether or not you make money. We want to be able to succeed at that. So there's kind of how do you merge those 2 worlds together becomes kind of interesting. But we're pretty excited about our pipeline of products, and we have several others that we're also kind of starting to look at. So before I kind of get into some of the animal health side of things, I think so now we've got a staff of 10 people We've grown the company. We're actually looking at talking with some more investors so we can continue to progress to some clinical trials in dogs. There's been a lot of interest in, once we can prove this in a dog with our stem cell version. So we work with iPS cells. So induced pluripotent cells can grow much more scalably. We can really reduce the cost of what we're doing to where there's more profit to be captured. But really, it's to be able to get to thousands of doses. We can bring in one donor's worth of induced pluripotent stem cells and make 1 million doses from it. There's also a lot to learn from the FDA pathway. So the FDA still does review all of these drugs just like they would on the human side. On the human side, we're used to seeing phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials. Those trials cost $100, $200 million or more. They say it takes about $1 billion to be able to bring a human drug to market. On the animal side, we just have to prove that it's safe and that it's effective. And because we're proving it in our, as we call it, our target species, we're going straight to dog or straight to cat, we save a lot of time. We don't have to go through, there's no phase studies. Once you prove it's effective, then you can do your clinical trials and be able to move to market. So the difference in development time could be, instead of 10 or 12 years for a human, it's 3 or 4 years for animals. And it's pretty amazing. I mean, the proof we have in dogs will eventually go to human as well. And so the human pathway will still take forever, but at least we'll know we'll have a product for vets. So we're pretty excited about that. So I'll just touch on the animal health industry. What's kind of cool about the animal health industry, and I think a lot of the reason we went into it, surprisingly, Kansas City is what they've termed it the animal health corridor. It's really the global center for animal health. About 56% of the global revenue, so a little over half of the actual profits made, the companies have strategic locations here in Kansas City. I mean, if you think of it, we're in the heartland, right? So I'm not just talking about pets, but I'm also talking about animal farming. We're here in farm country, and a lot of the animal health companies, their headquarters are located here. If you're out in Shawnee, you'll see Bayer. If you're in Lenexa, you'll see Seva. If you go up to St. Joe, Missouri, you'll see Boehringer Ingelheim. And there's a countless number of companies. So I'll kind of show that. Obviously, we have our vet schools that surround us. Boo K-State, where I'm a KU grad. But, I mean, they have vet schools that surround us. So that's kind of where the corridor stretches. We've got the major companies that many of us know their names when we see it. Companies like Merck, Elanco just went public. They're actually out of Eli Lilly. We all know Bayer and Boehringer Ingelheim. Obviously, they have human components to them. We've also got the food companies. So up in St. Joe, Nestle Purina is headquartered up there. Out in Topeka, we have Hills. We also have some feed additive companies like Biomin in town. We have a lot of the manufacturing companies that support this and distributors that support the animal health industry. You have a lot of, startups in this area, small businesses in this area that operate in this industry. I know I have Araton up here. They were just bought by Elanco, and Elanco actually bought Bayer, so that's consolidated somewhat. But we also have a lot of contract research firms. So not only do we have research that happens at the university level, so more early phase research, but we have contract research labs where the pharma companies would do more of their research support studies. So a lot of animal studies at these labs, a lot of the standard studies that the FDA needs, these labs do provide. And then we have some of the big national governmental agencies like the USDA and NBAF out in Manhattan. And surprisingly, we also have the headquarters for the Dairy Farmers of America. So we don't necessarily think about just the animals we eat, but what else they provide for us. So that's all located in the Kansas City region. And so it's amazing to think, okay, well, all these companies are here. There's also jobs at all these companies. A lot of them have their R&D headquarters out here or have R&D facilities out here. Kind of thinking is, as an animal health executive, kind of how do we think of the world? So there's companion animals makes up about 1/3 of the animals that get treated in this industry. Production and food animals make up about 2/3. Now in the United States, it's actually, if you only focus on the US, it's flipped. About 2/3 of it is companion animals. So in America, we love our cats and dogs. And then the rest is food production. But if you think worldwide, really it's food production. So what's exciting about it, we are seeing in our pets, because they're moving from the farm into the house, really into our beds, that they're becoming family members. And so we're seeing healthcare come to them at a better rate. More people are willing to spend on them as family members. On the food side, it's really population growth, that globally we just need more food supply. So it's an industry that is growing, and there's exciting opportunities there. I think one of the fun ones about it is it's a recession-proof industry. So in 2008, it was continuing to grow because people wanted to ensure their pets still survived through it, even if they lacked some of the medical care. They ensured their pets went through that care. I remember as a firefighter, we had some animals come from Hurricane Katrina to Boulder. And while we were giving medical, so those owners did not want to give up their animals. So in order to give them medical care, we actually had a team of us work with the animals while a team of nurses actually worked with the owners. And so it was a way to get them to also get their animals some care while they're getting care. So it was an interesting way to look at it. And I mean, that was back in 2006. So that's been growing. Just some staggering numbers that I always find interesting. When we think on the food and production animal side, it's in the billions of animals that are around the world. I think one of the biggest numbers I think is crazy is when we think of chickens, 62 billion chickens producing over 1 trillion eggs. Like that just, it kind of fascinates me. I will definitely say I'm not on the edible side of the business. I'm on the petable side of the business. So for companion animals, I think this is kind of where I got kind of excited in the industry, is the fact that I've grown up with a dog. How would we treat our dog? They are moving from the yard into the house to the bed. That's kind of a general trend we're seeing here. We're actually seeing that catch up in places like India, China, Brazil, where pets are now starting to move from being stray dogs to actually being, there's rescues, they're starting to move to the house, get fed better. So you're seeing this also start to happen globally. Obviously, Europe is very similar to America. You see this in the UK, Germany, France. And when we think of numbers, it's kind of a way to put this into perspective. So animal health it's a $60 billion industry. That's actually small compared to humans, which is a $4 trillion industry. So we're like a fraction of that. But there's a lot that goes into it, from not just the pharmaceutical products that we have to develop, flea and tick medications, vaccines for food animals, ensuring their health care is still great as they're going through food production, but also all of the support services that come around healthcare. So we think a lot about human diagnostics. Well, blood work in animals, there's several companies working in diagnostics there. A lot of those diagnostics were actually developed using, animal products. We think about, ELISAs that we're using. We usually are probably more used to in research seeing mouse and rat, or maybe some rabbit, but I mean, a lot of these companies also make cat, dog, horse. A lot of antibodies you'll hear come from them. So it's a way for us to see diagnostics and devices come out of human health. And then there's obviously beyond that, pet food, specialty pet foods, medicated pet foods, any kind of feed additive. So it is a growing industry, which is fun. And I think what's exciting is a lot of people don't necessarily recognize it as an opportunity. When they think animal health, they think, oh yeah, that's a veterinarian. But many of us as researchers go into that thinking, well, there's opportunity there. So there's some similarities, you know, between animal health and human health. I think obviously there's some diseases. So animals get cancer, get diabetes. You may have heard of animals who have arthritis. Horses and dogs get arthritis. Obviously, anxiety is something we see with, you know, puppy Prozac. So animals get a lot of the same diseases, illnesses we do. A lot of the pathogens can cross over. Things like Ebola, Lyme disease can cross over from animal into human. And we're all sharing the same environment. I don't know how many of you guys love puppies, but if we let them kiss our faces, wouldn't you want to make sure that your puppy is at least treated well, so that way you don't get whatever they have? And obviously we see them used as research models for diseases, and so we do see a lot of similarities. Now there's also a lot of differences. For humans, we are one species. So, you know, as a human health researcher, you're like, oh, well, eventually I'm treating humans. For animals, we have to think about it as multiple species. We may be focused on a treatment for diabetic dogs, but cats get that same disease. The product's probably not going to be the same product that works for cats and for dogs. If we were looking at insulin, that is the case. You can use insulin, human insulin, in a cat and a dog. But if we're looking at cells, the question comes up, can you put human cells into a cat or dog? Do I need to create cat-specific cells, dog-specific cells? So there are definitely species differences there. Obviously, I think one of the big ones to think about is the payer. So in the human side, we have the third-party payer and insurance companies that can support the cost of drugs. But on animals, it comes out of our pocket. It's really the animal owner that ends up paying for it. And euthanasia is an option in an animal where it's not in a human. But the fun part of it, drug development is so much easier. And so as a researcher, I get excited because we get to see our product progress and get into an animal. And I mean, when we cured those dogs, as I showed you on the graph, it was amazing to see an islet transplant go into an animal, actually cure an animal. And we had looked at actually bringing that kind of a product forward as a transplant solution. It just is too expensive that, again, you know, there'd be the handful of people who would pay the $10,000 to $15,000 that version would cost. And really, we wanted to be able to help more pets than a handful. So yeah, this is really kind of looking at the drug development, that it's over $1 billion to develop one drug for human. Part of that has to do with the failure of certain drugs as they're tested from the bench to rodents. They just never make it to humans. And then there's obviously a handful that might work in a small percentage, but then when you go to phase 2 or phase 3 clinical trials, you realize that 1 in maybe 10,000, it actually causes an issue. Drugs like Vioxx and stuff that were pulled off the market. In animals, we actually get to go test it straight into our animal of choice. And so it speeds that up. I think one other kind of area I'll touch on, I think before I get to a few of those slides, I might ask if anyone has any questions. I didn't really give any time for that yet, but any questions? Yeah.
So it seems to me like the impression you got is going into animals was kind of just this happy accident. It's just the product of getting going through the scientific process and just going into animals. So could you expand on that a little bit?
Yes. So the question really focuses on if you're, you know, was it a happy accident to get into animals? And I think one of the things that we recognized is a lot of the treatments that currently are working and used in pets were treatments that first get developed for humans and then kind of make their way backwards to pets. When we were looking at it, there is that kind of happy accident of we're in Kansas City, there's a lot of support around animal health, but there was also a business case to be made, which is, who are we competing against? So if we look at the human side, there are tons of universities and companies and investors, and I'll say they're on the coast, that are competing to get to products in humans. And when you're focused on that, really you're just focusing on a solution that can work for humans. When we looked at it, we thought, you know, in Kansas City, it's a smaller region. It's harder to raise hundreds of millions of dollars. It's easy when you're in Boston to raise $100 million. You might get a couple million here in Kansas City. So what we thought is, as we looked at animals, there were the two questions that come up. One is, there really isn't a good competitor who can compete with us there. It's going to be harder to get money to fund that, but we know our product could work in that respect. So it was a calculated move in that respect to say, let's go compete in animals. If we never make it to humans, we're focused on a successful product in animals. So when we'd drawn up our business plans and everything, we had to focus on, this has to work in a cat or a dog. The proof point can't, it slightly works, but it's too expensive. So, okay, we'll shift and go to humans. We never really wanted that to happen. We have always had it that, no, it has to work in a dog. And if by happenstance that can then go to human, that's beneficial. So part calculated, part luck too. There are some other universities who have kind of looked at this area. I'll say in cats, we're one of only 3 groups in the entire world, and 2 are universities. And so we're the only one heavily investing in how to get to cats. In dogs, there's been a couple groups look at it, all from the human side. And then they realize, oh yeah, $2,500, that's how much just the enzyme costs to digest a pancreas. And you look at that and you say, well, it sucks for you. That's why we're looking at it completely differently. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What do you kind of look for or expect for like scientists? Not saying you just go to the postdoc and then
Yeah.
do you expect extra training on PhD? Do you expect like a business side at all?
So that's a good question. What kind of training do scientists need as they're, approaching industry? It really, I think postdocs aren't necessarily required per se. I think it really comes down to, do you have the skill set to run a project? So if you were a PhD student and you might have had an undergrad or 2 under you, I played to that expertise of, hey, look, I got to manage 1 or 2 people. I got to manage my project. Obviously, you're coming in as a PhD with experience leading a project. Even as a master's, I think you can come in with saying, look, I led a project. I provided a solution. I think a lot of what the industry also looks at is troubleshooting. So in academia, you can fail, and failure is okay. I think you can publish on, yeah, here's what I got to succeed, here's where I got to fail. Failure costs money on the industry side. So being able to troubleshoot through things, I think that's another aspect that's important. I think in our team of 10, I'd say I think only 1 or 2 did an actual postdoc. So I'm not necessarily including Lisa, who has been around a long time. I think she did a postdoc. I didn't do a postdoc getting into this. I think one of our hydrogel developers didn't do a postdoc. I think there it really comes down to, as you're looking at opportunities, postdocs just give you more experience, which is always helpful. Some companies may require it, but in the industry, I think it really comes down to, when you have that advanced degree, you are sought after. I think it is actually pretty hard for us to find high quality scientists. Technicians is kind of a different story when you need someone who can support cell culture. There it really comes into the hands-on skills. But I think for a PhD, it really comes into, can you think through, design a project, think through troubleshooting that project, and be able to come up with a report at the end that says, this is the direction that we want to take this next. Yeah. Any other questions? I can kind of show a couple other just growing areas. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
I'm actually at the end of my postdoc as well, and that's basically they're working with animal health all this time, so I'd like to see transfer to industry, and animal health skills translate specifically as well academia to industry. But I'm wondering specifically, what kind of skills are you looking for mostly? what kind of training skills do you mostly look for?
Yeah, so that's good. Yeah, so as a postdoc researcher who has animal skills, so that's going to be handling animals, doing surgical techniques on animals. I would say contract research is really where you see a lot of that happening. So contract research organizations where they are handling animals and completing animal studies. Having that experience in, you're not a trained vet, but you are trained in animal handling. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. It's comfort with animals is really what that's about.
Yeah, that's something that, like, for example, I recently interviewed over at SIVA, and they were, looking for people, whatever, and specifically their skills or whatever, and how to translate. So they're talking about like making chickens specifically, and ours we work with developing like vaccine apps, so just kind of having the basics and how to affect that development as well. So
Yeah. So actually, when you're looking at things like chickens, and some of the vaccine development that goes into like cows, I mean, as researchers, we don't necessarily work on those animal models. I think there it comes to, do you have the science on the vaccine